Just want to make sure. Okay.
Next Monday when the test is over.
Yeah, I was just about to talk about that, so thanks for reminding me of that. All right, we've got a couple students I'm still waiting on here, but we'll get started and let them stream in as they do. So happy Monday, everybody. Hopefully you all had a good weekend and a good day today. Real quick, just to kind of remind you of where we're at. This is our second to last Monday, so we'll meet tonight, and then next Monday will be our last night. The two chapters that we'll go over tonight are chapters 11 and 12, and you will have your normal discussion boards and case studies that we'll talk about at the end of each of those chapters tonight. And a reminder that week 7, which is next week, there are 2 assignments that are due next week, the leadership paper, and then also the online written exam. So don't forget that next week, the week ends on Friday. It does not end on Sunday. So both of those assignments are due Friday at midnight. So keep that in mind. I will be posting the online written exam. You'll know what the questions are for that. Those will be available to you on Monday. So you'll have Monday through Friday to work on that final exam. And again, the leadership paper, if you want to turn in a rough draft or send in some sort of short summary of the 2 leadership styles or the leadership theories that you chose, just so I can kind of get an idea of what you're going to be doing, you're more than welcome to do that. Don't wait until Wednesday or Thursday of next week, though, to do that. If you want me to take a look at that, try to do it this week at some point so I can do that, but I'm more than willing to take a look at those if you need me to. I believe that's it. Are there any questions about what we're going to be doing this week or next week? Okay, and again, you're always welcome to email me. Keep an eye, especially these last 2 weeks, on the homepage or the announcements on the course homepage. I don't anticipate that I'll be posting anything new, but just keep an eye on those announcements if something does come up, or if someone has a question and I need to answer it. Make sure to keep an eye on the announcements. And also just a reminder that there is an example of a leadership paper from a former student that's posted on Canvas. So if you have your leadership theories chosen and you're still trying to figure out formatting or how exactly I'm looking for the paper to be formatted like, definitely take a look at that. That's posted on Canvas. All right, so there's like 12 days left in the semester, so the end is in sight. Hopefully all of you have either had a chance to start your paper or at least have an idea of what you're doing. Do not wait till the last minute to do that, especially with the written exam. Those 2 assignments will be a lot of writing, so make sure, I would say focus on the leadership paper this week. Try to have the majority of that done. That way next week for the written exam, you're not trying to do both of those major assignments all at the same time. Okay, are there any questions? Yes. What is that? It will not have a time limit. So the questions will be posted on Monday, and then you'll have the full week to work on them. And then you just have to submit them by Friday. So there is no time limit on that. And I'll talk more about that next week. I'll actually pull that up on the screen so everyone can see what that's going to be. So, but those questions will come from various things that we've discussed from the different PowerPoints. So you should be able, with your textbook and the PowerPoint information, be able to answer all those questions in depth. And so that, but again, we'll talk more about that next week on Monday night. Any other questions? Okay. I wanted to, is Phil still there? Or did he already take off?
You can go up.
Okay. Okay, that's fine. I just want to make sure everything was working there. Okay. I wanted to go over the chapter 9 and 10 case studies that you had due last night. So we'll start with the chapter 9 case study. I want to get some of your answers and some of your feedback on what you put for these. So for chapter 9, the case study, case for analysis, was the superintendent's directive. So this is a fairly short one, so I'm going to read it quickly here, and then we'll answer the 3 questions and hear what you guys have to say about it. So the superintendent's directive. Educational administrators are bombarded by requests for innovation at all levels. Programs to upgrade math, science, and social science education, state accountability plans, new approaches to administration, and other ideas are initiated by teachers, administrators, interest groups, reformers, and state regulators. In a school district, the superintendent is the key leader. In an individual school, the principal is the key leader. In the Carville City School District, Superintendent Porter has responsibility for 11 schools, 8 elementary, 2 junior high, and 1 high school. After attending a management summer course, Porter sent the following email to the principal of each school. Please request that teachers in your school develop a set of performance objectives for each class they teach. A consultant will be providing instructions for writing the performance objectives during the August 10th in-service day. The deadline for submitting the performance objectives to my office is September 21st. Mr. Wygand, principal of Earsworth Elementary School, forwarded Porter's email to his teachers with the following message. Please see the forwarded email from Superintendent Porter. As he explains, you will need to write performance objectives for each course you teach. These are due 1 month from today. This afternoon, during the in-service meeting, you will receive training on how to write these performance objectives. After receiving this email, several teachers at the elementary school responded with a flurry of hastily written email responses. One well-respected and talented teacher wrote the following email, accidentally sending it to Mr. Wygand instead of her colleagues. This is nonsense. I should be spending my time focused on the lesson plan for the new advanced English class the Board of Education approved. Porter is clueless and has no idea the demands we are facing in the classroom. We never even hear from him until he wants us to complete some empty exercise. I'm going to start looking for a school district that values my time. Mr. Wygand was stunned by this email, wondering if he was close to losing a valuable teacher who was admired by her peers and others in the school system. He knew this email had been written in haste and that this teacher would be embarrassed to know that he had received it. He was concerned that other teachers may have reacted in similar ways to his email. He also wondered how to respond to the angry email and how to improve morale at the start of a new school year. Okay, so question number 1 says to evaluate the email communications of Mr. Porter and Mr. Wygand. To what extent are they communicating effectively about the new performance objectives? And if you were a teacher, how would you have felt about receiving the email? So let's start with looking at the communication first of Mr. Porter. What are your thoughts on his initial email that went from Mr. Porter to the principal of each school? Yes. Okay.
But I can see why some wouldn't, because why doing that?
Okay. Okay, so you're talking about from the superintendent to the principals, or from the principals down to just all of it? Okay, okay. Yeah, there was not much explanation of why they were wanting these performance objectives. So that would raise a lot of questions, both from a principal's point of view and from the teacher's point of view. Exactly why are we being told to do this? What's the point behind this? You know, this is just more busy work if I don't know exactly how these objectives are going to be used. Are they going to be used in performance reviews? Are they going to be used against me if I'm not meeting these objectives? So both of those reasons, I think, make a lot of sense. What are some other evaluations you made from these emails? Mm-hmm.
It seems like this
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Wyden waited until the day of.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think he kind of, and he also just forwarded the email.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't really do any more explanation.
Yeah. Yeah. Anytime I get an email that has the FWD at the beginning of it, I don't necessarily, maybe I should, but in the back of my mind psychologically, I don't pay as much attention to it. Since it came from someone who then forwarded it to me, it's a little bit harder for me to focus on that as much as if it came directly from my superior. Even if there was forwarded information in it, just seeing that FWD in front of it, I tend to not focus on it quite as much as I probably should. But I would agree. It doesn't say when the superintendent sent this out, but it does seem like Mr. Wygand waited until the last minute or very close to the deadline where he said, you have 1 month from today. Oh, by the way, the in-service meeting today is when you'll receive training on how to write these performance objectives, which means that going into this in-service meeting, the teachers had no idea that this was coming down the pipe. So it was very last minute to Mr. Wygand, and there really is no way to know how long the time frame was between when he received it from the superintendent and then when he passed it along to his teachers. Okay, what else did you find interesting about these emails or any other evaluations? Yeah.
I would say, Mr. Wygan, he was the principal, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
He should have probably asked more questions about why they were coming in.
Yeah.
In detail, and then kind of reported that in the message to
Yeah.
sort of relaying what he said.
Yeah, I agree. I think Mr. Wygand, the principal, probably should have replied to the original email from Mr. Porter. Yeah, getting more specifics on what's going on here. And he probably should have stood up for his teachers a little bit. Like it says here from this email from one of these teachers, she wants more time to focus on lesson plans for a new advanced English class she's teaching. So Mr. Wygand should have realized that, hey, my teachers are focusing on other things that right now might be more important to them and the classes they teach than putting together learning objectives. So he could have done a better job if these learning objectives were super important, then explaining that in his email that this is, these are the reasons why they're so important. I understand you've got all this other stuff going on, and we'll figure this out together, and I can help in any way possible to put these learning objectives together.
I wouldn't have sent that email. Mr. Whitehead, I don't think should have sent the email at all.
Okay.
I think that since he's going to be at that in-service meeting that afternoon, I dropped the bombshell and stirred everybody up just hours before.
Yeah.
Get the information, get the superintendent. Superintendent's only got 8 other schools.
Right.
Have them show up, help them understand what the objective is
Yeah.
for this exercise.
Yeah.
Help the teachers understand that, he's being pressured by other members of the community, other educators, how important this is. So what this is going to do is help the school, tell the community what a great job the teachers are doing.
Yeah.
That's kind of the objective, I think.
Yeah, I would agree with that. The email to the teachers potentially could have just been held off, or maybe just telling the teachers, hey, the superintendent will be at the meeting today, and that, he may have some things that he wants you to do. I don't know. And just kind of leave it at that. And then let the superintendent, not that the superintendent takes the brunt of the hate, but at least it comes from the person who is requiring these things and can explain them a little bit better to the faculty as a whole.
Another biggest thing is normally if you want to have a objective performance, I think maybe we need to have a reasonable one.
Mm-hmm.
So normally I think for an organization, they will have the objective performance from up to down.
Mm-hmm.
So the organization, for example, for the school, they should know, the principal maybe they should know what's the objective for the whole school.
Yeah.
Then, separate the whole objective into different departments,
Mm-hmm.
to different staff.
Yeah.
This is reasonable. If I'm a teacher, maybe for me, I think the most important thing, I will give more homework to my students. Maybe this is my habit, but the habit may be not useful or helpful
Yeah.
for the. So I think the bosses should think it clearly.
Yeah.
Have the objective, then go down.
Yeah, I would agree with that because it sounds like they want each individual teacher to make these own objectives. And so they're going to be all over the board with those. If you had Mr. Wygand, or even coming down from the superintendent, of these are the, school district objectives, that those go down to the individual schools and they have their set objectives, then the teachers can work off of those objectives and maybe modify them a little bit for their subject or their class topics. That way they're all kind of uniform, and that means the teachers, they already have kind of a template for what they're looking for. I like that top-down approach when it comes to objectives. I think that would make a lot of sense because Mr. Wygand has set himself up for a situation where it doesn't say how many teachers are in this specific school, but let's say there's 25 teachers. He's going to be getting 25 learning objectives for all these different classes, and how is he going to be able to review all those and give feedback? And then it's going to be a back and forth process to get those corrected. So that's definitely something they need to think about. Yeah, I like that idea though. Okay, any other thoughts specifically on just evaluating the emails themselves?
Positive note, they were very clear with their expectations.
Yeah, the dates were set out, that learning objectives had to be set up for every class. There would be an in-service day where more explanation would be given. And so, the basic information, the cold hard facts are there. Yeah, so that is a positive. Okay, so if you were a teacher, how would you have felt after receiving the email? So we got a little explanation here that just receiving the email in the first place would have stirred up emotions just in the fact that it came that close to an important in-service day. So what are some of the other ways you would have felt about receiving this email? I know personally, if I was in a position, and Dr. Knight, who's the director of the business department at Carson Newman, in mid-August, a week before classes started, sent me an email telling me, hey, I need updated performance objectives or learning objectives for all of your classes. And, that would be stressful. That would be, even though I could probably produce them fairly easily, because I have like learning objectives in the syllabus and kind of an idea of what the business department's objectives are as a whole, I could probably put them together fairly quickly. But trying to prepare classes, putting together assignments, getting Canvas all set up, having meetings with students about their schedules, all these, and then all of a sudden you throw something like this on me, I'd probably be angry and stressed out as well. So at least personally, that's how I would feel. How about any of you? Similar? Mm-hmm.
Basically, we have experts come in.
Yeah.
Like a week before school, help them figure out what
Yeah.
show me, trust me to come up with goals.
Yeah. If they say that, did they say experts? Is that the word that they use? Consultants, but same idea. That would be kind of disrespectful from that wording, that, hey, we don't trust you as teachers, that you're teaching what you're supposed to teach. We're going to bring in people to help you do that. That would be disrespectful. I can understand that take on it. Any other thoughts if you put yourselves in the shoes of these teachers?
I would probably look up to the teacher
Mm-hmm.
So like, I would probably look for their reaction before I spoke to their math.
Yeah. Yeah. This teacher, they say, was one of the most well-respected, talented teachers. And even Mr. Wygand, after seeing this email that incorrectly came to him, said that she's a valuable teacher who's admired by her peers and others. So it even got him thinking, this must have been one of the star teachers. And that would be worrisome if you get that from one of those type of teachers. One thing that I don't understand is from the teacher's point of view, I've always been told from a professor standpoint at Carson Newman, never put anything in writing that could come back to bite you. If you're going to do these things, don't do it through the email system. If you have an issue or something, emails can be traced. They're recorded. IT can go in and find them. So you shouldn't, like, even this email from this teacher, that's a mistake to send something like that out. Even if that's the way you feel, if you want to discuss these things with other teachers, go to them directly and have the communication face-to-face through voice, not through email that can be saved, tracked, accidentally reply all, you forward it to the wrong person, that email somehow gets out to the public. Now the public sees it. You could accidentally send it to the parents of the kids in your classroom. Who knows? But technology can be wild sometimes. And so you should always be very careful about what you send in emails and who you send emails to. It always frustrates me. I mean, it's just more of a pet peeve, but when like someone sends out an email and says, I need a reply from each of you about some topic, and instead of replying directly back to the person who sent it, they click reply all. And then I get bombarded with all these emails that just say, I agree, or I disagree, or the student has been attending class, or whatever it may be. I'm like, I personally don't need to see that. Just reply to the person who sent that email. So that's kind of a pet peeve of mine. I don't even know if the people sending those emails realized what they were doing, but just the way technology works, you never want to have something like this that can be printed out or used against you. So that's just a word of caution to all of you. Be careful what you put in emails. Okay. Question number 2 is, if you were Mr. Wygand, how would you respond to the angry teacher? How would you communicate with her? What would you say? Would you communicate with her, or would you just kind of let it go and
You have to.
you have to communicate? Okay.
Intended to send it to somebody and that person didn't get it. Probably didn't have to.
Okay.
But yeah, I think you have to have that conversation.
Okay. So you do make a response.
I would have her come in person and just talk.
Okay. Yeah.
But yeah, hopefully at this point you know
Mm-hmm.
the intentions of what's happening.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I think you have to have the teacher come in, responding to the email. Obviously, emails are not very effective in the school district, so the face-to-face needs to occur. How many of you would agree with that you need to meet face-to-face with this teacher? Okay. Okay, so then what do you say to her? How do you start this conversation? Mm-hmm.
Tell the teacher why objective process and collect the information I use.
Okay.
To understand his or her difficulties
Okay.
in the real job.
So instead of focusing on or reprimanding her for her email, you would focus on more of explaining why we're doing this. The question I have, and it doesn't really talk about it here, is does Mr. Wygand even know why they're doing these performance reviews, or not the learning objectives? Because I don't even know if he knows why they're doing them. But if he did, I think that's a good idea is, you know, don't embarrass her, don't reprimand her, but focus more on, I'm sorry, I did not explain why we're doing these learning objectives. Let me lay out for you why we're doing them. Let's forget about your email kind of thing, and let's focus on moving forward, how we can, you know, how we can work together to get these learning objectives done. Yeah, we need you. Like, he could even go back, like, you know, I felt very saddened because you're one of the most valuable teachers we have. So when I saw that email, I wasn't angry. I was more worried about what you were thinking because you're so valuable to our team. So what other thoughts, or how else would you communicate with her?
I think you could put in like a soft reminder. I know things aren't going to be perfect here, but
Yeah.
don't complain about stuff here.
Yeah.
You can talk with other teachers.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, I don't know what Mr. Wygand's policy was on, you know, open door policy or whatever, but I would agree with that. They're just explaining to her that, you know, if you have issues or you have things that you're frustrated with, come talk to me directly.
I would take it as a chance to really open communication.
Mm-hmm.
And, I mean, you also recognize that that teacher's representing something that the rest of the community probably feeling.
Yeah.
And to open communications up, let them send out one more email, not in response to her, but another email saying, hey, I know there are questions. I'm going to listen.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to give you context for the request.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about it during this afternoon's service session.
Yeah, this definitely is a chance for Mr. Wygand to open conversation and focus more on, like I said, focus more on moving forward than the anger and frustration of the teachers.
And listen.
And listen, yes. Okay, so let's say that you could go back, if you're Mr. Wygand, you received this email from the superintendent. So how should Mr. Wygand have communicated differently about the performance objectives? Let's say you could go back, he just received this email from the superintendent. What would you do at that point? Mm-hmm.
Hey, tell them to do this.
Yeah.
I think you should kind of explain. You say, hey, this is going on. This is going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like we said earlier.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, I agree with that. Reply to Porter, or at least determine what these learning objectives are for. What else? I would have tried to, and again, it doesn't say how long it took between when he received that email and when he forwarded it, but anytime that important of an email or that important of an assignment comes down the pipe, you should probably get that information out very quickly, or at least let your employees be aware there's going to be something that's going to be added, or something that's going to come up. That it won't be terribly a lot of work, but it's going to require a little bit of extra time for you as teachers. Okay, question number 3, and I kind of touched on this already, identifying the mistakes that the teacher made. From a personal standpoint, she never even should have sent that email, period. But let's say, you know, she sent this email based on this case here. So what mistakes did she make in this email because it was already sent? What did you see in there that was a mistake? The biggest mistake is not checking who you're sending it to. I completely agree with that. I don't know if she realizes that she's one of the most well-respected, talented teachers, but in a power or in a position of influence like she has, to lead off an email saying this is nonsense exclamation point, that's going to stir up a lot just because of her influence on others. So, I mean, she wrote this email out of pure emotion. And I think coming from, it sounds like that's maybe not who she is as a person. She probably should have focused on more of, instead of, spreading anger or fear or whatever, focus more on not necessarily positivity, but at least bring to the attention of the teachers, hey, Mr. Wygand is, we respect him as a leader. Let's figure out what this is all about. We're gonna, let's work on this together, and something like that, because throwing out that this is nonsense right at the start, that immediately is going to incite a lot of frustrated feelings from other people. I don't know if any of you have been in organizations where there's one person that when they get emotional, everybody gets emotional, or you hear the saying, like, if mama's not happy, nobody's happy kind of thing. Like, there are people like that everybody kind of feeds off the emotions or the thoughts of that one person, for better or worse. And so it sounds like she's one of the teachers that probably has that kind of influence. What else about her email, the composition of the email, that you would change? Yes. Yeah. You definitely do not want to put people down. You can question people, and you can, I ask or put out the question of, I don't necessarily agree with what they're saying, or I don't understand their point of view on this, but to call someone clueless, even if they are clueless, it's not the right way to go about it. Mr. Porter is clueless. Yeah, just calling him Porter in a way is kind of disrespectful. Yeah. That too, yeah. And just at the last sentence where she says, I am going to start looking for a school district that values my time. From an influential point of view, if someone told me that I really respected and regarded in a high sense, if someone said they're going to start looking for a new school district or a new job, I would start questioning my job security, or at least, am I in the right position? Am I in the right job? Like that raises a lot of questions right there from everyone who received that email. Okay, any other thoughts on this case? I really like this one. I think it brings up a lot of good lessons on how and when to send emails, and when it's right or wrong to put certain aspects in emails as well, and definitely something to work on in a leadership communication role. Okay, moving on to chapter 10, to decision time on page 319 and 320. Okay, so I'll go ahead and read through this real quick, just so we're on the same page. So Ben Dooley and Casey Stringer had agreed to stop for coffee in the atrium Starbucks before heading up to the 35th floor for a board meeting. You seem deep in thought, Ben said, placing the 2 cups of hot coffee on the table. Watching Jonna and Robert in previous board meetings helps me to understand why the folks in Congress can't get anything done, Casey mused. Both sides have stated their positions, and nothing will budge them. I dread this meeting. I'd rather have a root canal. Well, while the 2 giants battle it out, the rest of us will have to work out some sort of compromise. We outsourced manufacturing operations to China several years ago to cut costs, and now things are changing rapidly, and we have a major decision. Does Bishop's engineered plastics make the best of the situation in China, or do we reshore? Casey added. Someone will have to be the voice of reason today, Ben said. Robert Ma has overseen the outsourcing to China, and initially it was a great move. I agree the cost savings were pretty amazing. The retooling and creation of a state-of-the-art factory in Wenzhou by the Chinese really propelled us to a new level within the industry. Well, 2012 is the year of the dragon, and the dragon is having a problem, Ben replied. Yes, Robert is going to have to face the fact that if we stay in China, we have to move from Wenzhou, Casey pointed out. The worker shortage is bad and getting worse. The last estimates for that region were 1 million workers short. As wages go up and other opportunities present themselves, manufacturing jobs are losing the appeal in the cities. In our plant, the managers have to come down and work on the lines. That's not good. Now, to try to stave off a mass industrial exodus, the Chinese are offering a stimulus to industries to relocate into the interior of the country. The interior offers more workers and lower wages. And a factory move will delay manufacturing and make shipping even more difficult, Ben replied. Add to that the Chinese insistence on full payment before shipping, and we're looking at some potentially serious delays. Jana, on the other hand, is going to argue that the situation in China is an indication that now is the perfect time to reshore. Bring the jobs back to the good old US of A, Casey said. She's going to dig in her heels on this one, and you and I know that at least 2 members of that August board are going to back off and let her have her way with no careful analysis of the pros and cons. I sometimes think Frank is a people pleaser, always agreeable, especially toward Jana, because she is the chair. And Martha usually doesn't say anything, much less offer an opinion. She stares down at her hands when the going gets heavy. The pros for Jana are obvious. Bring jobs home when jobs are needed, shorten the supply line, reduce shipping costs, offer faster response to customers, and I believe offer a better quality product. It is worth a little higher labor cost. And what are the cons? The problems are the higher wages here and the cost of retooling factories in this country that have been down for a few years. But, Casey asked, would we have to build a new factory deep in China's interior? No. And will their interior workforce be adequately trained? I would guess not. The Chinese government will help with building and relocation costs, but still. So both Jana and Robert have a strong argument and some glaring weaknesses. Is there room in here for a compromise? That's what I would like to see. They would both get something, opined Ben. I don't know. I'm eager to see what each of them presents. It should be an interesting conversation. Or an afternoon in hell, Ben said as the two headed for the elevator. I wonder what you and I might do to help Jana and Robert resolve this conflict. What do you think we should do, Casey? Okay, so question number 1 is what styles for handling conflict appear among the board members? What are some of the individuals and how they handle conflict? Robert and Jana are very dominating, and it says that both of them, at least from what they say, is that they're both going to dig their heels in and nothing will budge them. So it sounds like they are both, their voices or their ideas, they're not very, it's going to be hard to get anything across to them that will change their minds. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And it doesn't say, really much about her, what her role is, other than, she stares down at her hands when the going gets heavy. So she is very, she would rather have other people make those decisions and not get involved at all. Okay, what are some of the other ways or styles that the leaders or the people in this handle conflict? Frank would be accommodating. Okay. He is a people pleaser. He seems more agreeable. But he also kind of falls into, well, again, Jana is the chair, so he may just be a yes man and not, more accommodating, that he's not going to voice his opinion. He'll go more along with the leader based on what she decides. Anything else with the leadership styles or the conflict styles here? I think Ben and Casey, I like the way they approach at least this conversation leading up to the meeting, that they have kind of identified, they kind of know how the people handle conflict going into it. So they're the ones who already know how Jonna is going into it, how Frank's going into it, how Martha's going into it. They and Robert, they've identified how conflict works with each of these people. And I think that is kind of the first step to, it seems like if they can formulate a strategy how to resolve this conflict, they at least know what needs to be done to somehow resolve this conflict based on how others handle conflict. But again, they leave it open there at the end on exactly how that's going to be done. The other thing about Casey and Ben is that when they list off the pros and the cons of each plan, they're very objective in the way they do that. They don't put subjectivity into that. So if they decide to help identify those pros and cons or the strengths and weaknesses of each plan, maybe that could help dissolve some of the tension that could come about. If they focus on, you know, both ideas have pros, both ideas have some cons, let's focus objectively on this situation and less on the stubbornness or whatever of each of us as an individual. I think that is something that could benefit them because of the way that they handle conflict, or at least come up with objective ideas. So question number 2, what options do Ben and Casey have for helping resolve the conflict between Jonna and Robert? So if you were Ben or Casey going into this meeting, what ideas would you come up with to help this situation? Yeah. I thought about that too when they said that they would both get something, or is there room for a compromise? It doesn't sound like that's possible. I don't know. Maybe some of you have some ideas or wisdom on how they could compromise, but to me, it sounds like all of one or all of the other. I don't know if there is a compromise. So I would agree with that.
Maybe they can like produce the full part and further part in China,
Mm-hmm.
and ship it to the US and assemble whole thing into the US.
So maybe, so have a factory in China and the US and do different parts of the process in the two countries. Okay, so produce the parts in China, assemble them in US, and then the shipping department would be in the United States to distribute them nationally. Okay, so that is a compromise potentially. And the only part of that is that when they discuss it, both Casey and Ben said that's what they would like to see, a compromise, but they both are questioning, is that possible? I think that would be the best situation, but is that even an option? But it sounds like that option could work. Okay. How else could they help in this situation?
Depending on their relationship with Frank and Martha, they can kind of approach them before just kind of like the conversation that they had in Starbucks.
Mm-hmm.
Just casually, like, we really need your input.
Yeah, they could form kind of a team or some sort of unwritten group that we're all going to work on this together to lower tensions and support Jonna and Robert in their decision making without backing down, or, you know, start looking at your hands, or like let's be strong together. Okay.
I think the decision target is to get a better solution for the company's profit,
Mm-hmm.
not to support this one or another one.
Yeah.
So I think they should collect the data of
Mm-hmm.
two different solutions,
Yeah.
and analyze the data and to calculate what will be more better benefitable.
Yeah, I would agree with that because Ben and Casey, throw out a lot of ideas, but they don't necessarily have the financial statements to back up what they're saying. So, how much would it cost to upgrade the facilities in the United States, to move the whole company back, to hire people in America? What kind of cost would that look like? Or like it says that China would help with building and relocation costs to the middle of the country. Well, what kind of funding does that look like? If that would cover all of that transition, then that seems like a no-brainer just to move it there. But then you also look, it says that, how much would it cost to train the people in central China as opposed to where they are? So, but then, risks as well. What if we move and all of a sudden the quality of our product goes down, or we can't get the same materials to inland China as we could where our current factory was? Like, those are all things that they would have to consider as well.
The conflict was really with the two, with Jonah and Robert.
Mm-hmm.
So approaching them ahead of time too.
Yeah.
And just to say, there has to be some decorum, has to be some ground rules to have a productive conversation.
I would agree too, because to me, I would agree the real conflict is between Jonna and Robert, not necessarily what the company needs to do, because it would seem to me that once they run all the numbers and get all the financial situations in place and identify the risks and have a kind of a SWOT analysis, it should be a fairly easy decision. Maybe not easy, but at least based on the objective facts, it should be pretty spelled out. This is the better option. So really it comes down to, I would agree, meeting with Jonna and Robert, or having someone above them who's in a leadership position above them to say, I know what you stand for. I know what you stand for. We need to figure out what's best for this company, and we need to put our differences aside for this meeting and figure it out, because they have to do something. And continuing to just butt heads on this is not going to work anymore. We have to come up with a final decision, and it's going to take you two coming together to make that happen. So I would agree with that. Okay, so we've kind of talked about this already, but what suggestions would you make to help board members arrive at a good team decision? Like I said, probably having like the risks, the financial statements, the pros and cons, like Ben and Casey had started to do, listed out. Those are all good ideas. What are some other suggestions you would make to come to a good team decision? Mm-hmm.
Open it up and say that this is one versus one situation right now, but we're making decisions for the company. We're all going to
Yeah.
good or bad, so it can't be binary.
Yeah.
And maybe even if you're still like a round robin way of discussing
Mm-hmm.
the two have different ideas.
Yeah. Yeah, I was thinking too, it doesn't say how many board members there are, but maybe splitting them into subcommittees or having break-off groups. Because I know being in a big group, depending on how many board members there, sometimes you feel like your voice is going to be lost, or it's a lot harder to bring things up in a larger group. If you split them into groups of 3 or 4 people, they may feel, especially what's her name? Martha might feel more comfortable in a smaller setting to bring up ideas and express concerns, or and again, like you said, explaining to everybody that, our decisions here are going to affect this company as a whole. We're going to, so your ideas need to come into play, because whatever we decide to do, it's going to change the way that you as an individual are going to do your job. So explaining that to everyone ahead of time, I would agree with that, is very vital to the process. Any other suggestions you would give to these board members? Okay.
Maybe you collect
Oh.
all the information,
Mm-hmm.
different ideas, and it's up to the people to make the decision.
Okay. Okay. So bring both ideas to the table, have everything written out, and then maybe pass it along to someone else to make the final decision. Okay. Yeah, I can understand that. Each board member gives their recommendation maybe, but then it goes to somebody else to make that decision. All right, let's stop there. We're gonna get into chapter 11. Let's take a quick break. It's 6:57 right now. Let's come back at 7:10. So about 13 minutes, and we will get into chapter 11. All right, see you all in a few minutes.
In the beginning, just so you know, like, it's just age, you know? Just, yeah, you just think about it. You just talk about it. Just job. Hmm? Violence? What violence? No, just casual.
All right, can you all in Jefferson City see the PowerPoint on the screen?
Yes.
We good? Okay, awesome.
What are you talking about?
Okay, let's start with chapter 11. We'll go through this first. We'll take a break and then do chapter 12. Both chapters, not that they're short, but we should be able to get through them fairly streamlined tonight. Chapter 11 is about developing leadership diversity, so which is a pretty not hot topic, but a word you hear a lot about in today's society is diversity. And how do we create that? What's the best way to approach that? So a couple learning objectives for this chapter then. I'll have a couple of questions to kind of open up the discussion for it. So learning objectives, first of all, understand and reduce the difficulties faced by minorities and organizations. Apply an awareness of the dimensions of diversity and multicultural issues in your everyday life. Encourage and support diversity to meet organizational needs. And then finally, consider the role of cultural values and attitudes in determining how to deal with employees from different cultures or ethnic backgrounds. Break down personal barriers that may stand in the way of becoming an inclusive leader, and use sponsorship and employee affinity groups to support female and minority participation and advancement. So the two definitions that kind of encompass this whole chapter, first of all, diversity is differences among people in terms of age, gender, race, or other dimensions. And then workforce diversity is a workforce made up of people with different human qualities or who belong to various cultural groups. So the first question I have for you, we'll get into it on the next slide. So if you're looking ahead, try not to look ahead to the next slide, but it describes age, gender, and race as three ways in which we have differences. What are some of the other differences when it comes to diversity? Education level, cultural differences, ethnicity, economic levels is another one, socioeconomic backgrounds. What other ones can you think of? Okay, we'll look at some on the next slide. So before we turn there, though, two more questions. And hopefully you all, I mean, we have a very diverse population here. There in Jefferson City, people from a lot of different backgrounds, which is awesome. So what are some of the benefits or the pros of having a diverse workforce or a student population or a community in general? What are some of the benefits? Different perspectives. Yep, absolutely. Yeah, different cultures have different decision-making strategies. And so bringing those together in a group or a workforce is very beneficial. Okay, what are some of the other benefits to having a diverse or diversity in general?
Questions tend to come, fresh questions from untainted minds.
Yeah.
That bring out, make people rethink things they think they already understand.
Yeah, different strategies. Yeah, there are ideas that come from different backgrounds that, yeah, you've never even considered before. Okay, how about on the opposite side? What are some of the challenges of diversity? I mean, diversity is a great thing, but along with it come challenges. So what are some of those challenges? Yeah, misunderstanding every culture, or just between males and females. There's a lot of different, just things that different people do that can be misinterpreted if you don't understand their background or how they do things. Another one I forgot to list here was religion is another way that diversity comes into play. So every religion has different morals or values or interpretations of daily situations or, different times of prayer that people need to take breaks for, or meditation time, those type of things that need to be considered as well. And that can be challenging if you don't understand how important those things are to different people. What are some other challenges with diversity? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. One of the big ones right now, and on the next slide, I think it lists it, but maybe not. But lifestyle right now is a big one, whether that's sexual orientation or, the use of marijuana or all these different things that come into play with the way people live their personal lives, and they want the freedom to do that. So being in a leadership position with people coming from all these different lifestyles can be challenging, especially if you don't agree with the way they're living their life, or they're bringing those ideas or morals into your business, or however it may be. That can be a major challenge. And how do you approach those issues with people? That can be a big one. Okay, what are some other challenges? What is that? Okay, so define that or go into that a little bit more. What do you mean by that? Mm-hmm.
And different style, like if maybe Asian candidate people prefer just work by themselves,
Mm-hmm.
like a group work.
Yeah, yeah, the way people want to work. I've seen that too, not just based on culture, but just the way people were raised. Do they work better in groups? Do they work better by themselves? Do they work better in the morning? Do they work better in the afternoon? Are they someone who just needs things set out for them? You need to do A, B, and C, or are they someone who's more creative that needs to be given a little more space to do things based on their background? I would agree with all those. What are some other challenges? Obviously, one of the big ones is language barriers. I have a friend who is a hostess at a restaurant, and most of the cooks that work in the back are from Latino descent. And so if there's ever an issue sometimes with an order, or there's a special instruction on one of the dishes that she's serving, sometimes communication can break down there, and having to figure out how to make that work. So language barriers is a big one. What are some of the other challenges? Any others that come to mind? Okay, well, that's a good list to kind of start off, and hopefully it gets you thinking in the right direction. So from a traditional point of view, some of the major areas of diversity that still exist, but looking back in the past, these were the main areas. So you can see there at the top row, age, race, gender, pay level, disability, lifestyle. All of those still matter, but we've evolved to a point today, you can see there, inclusive model. This is more of where we are today, or from a leadership position, you have to think more about all of these things now than potentially in the past. So you still have race, gender, lifestyle, pay level, but now you look at function, competency, which could come back to educational levels, income, parental background, language, work style, military experience, position, nationality, personality. So diversity defined now as to in the past, it's more wide. There's a wider array of diversity that we're talking about. One of the things also are changing attitudes toward diversity. Obviously right now, the hot button issue is race, the Black Lives Matter movement and all that stuff in America right now. And so the changing attitudes, or the way that we approach this diversity, is constantly changing. And we're seeing this right now in everything that's going on in our society and the way that we approach it. So on page 330, there are a couple stats here that are kind of intriguing. So this is in the United States, is that minorities now make up roughly 39% of the total population. Around 32 million people speak Spanish at home, and nearly half of these people say they don't speak English very well. Foreign-born workers make up more than 16% of the U.S. workforce. Looking ahead, the number of Hispanic employees will grow the most, increasing 18.6% by 2020, which is now. Women are a growing part of the workforce and are increasingly demanding more fair and equitable treatment. Polls also show that views about social norms and lifestyles are shifting. The percentage saying society should encourage greater tolerance of people with different lifestyles and backgrounds increased from 29% in 1999 to 44% in 2013, and I would imagine that's well over 50% now. Support for gay marriage increased to 53% from 30% in 2004, and same-sex marriage became legal in the United States in June of 2015. So all of those are some statistics that speak to this changing view on diversity in the workplace or in society as a whole. Some of the factors contributing to this are demographic changes. Like I said, 39% of the total population now is minorities within the United States. So that could have a piece to do with it. It could be, leadership that went into that as well. Again, things like that. Shifting social values, when they talked in here about gay marriage or the different lifestyles of those type of people, that plays into it as well, the social values. And then globalization, being able to communicate with people around the world or do business, or like we looked at that case study in the last chapter about having shifting your market to China or having facilities in different countries, that plays into it as well, the globalization of the business or society as a whole. So that's what they mean by that. So some of the value, like we talked about, what are some of the benefits of diversity in the workplace? Some of the ones that the textbook talks about to build upon what we already discussed are a diversity of thought, aids in high performance or achieving high performance, which we kind of already brought up. There's a broader and deeper base of ideas, opinions, and experiences, increased creativity and innovation, financial competitiveness, and it helps meet the needs of diverse customers. So asking you as a whole, do any of you have personal examples from either work-related or school-related where you could say that, yeah, I saw a benefit from the diversity of the situation that I was in? Do any of you have personal examples where you've seen benefits of diversity? Anyone want to share? This classroom? Okay. Okay. What examples about this classroom? Just hearing different people's ideas? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it definitely helps broaden the mind. That's for sure. Okay. Any other examples? Personal examples from school or work or home or trips you've been on or coworkers you've worked with? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Learning, yeah, not just within a company, but learning the backgrounds and the interests and likes of people outside. That can be a great way to grow just friendships, but it also helps you understand them more as how they work and what their beliefs are about the workplace and things like that. So how many of you have had coworkers that have been from either different countries or backgrounds that you've learned a lot or appreciated more about their culture because they were there? Okay. Okay. Yeah, I definitely have as well. The professor that has his office right next to me is from the Middle East. So I get so much perspective on his thoughts on what's going on in the Middle East right now that I would have never known if he didn't work next to me. So just understanding his point of view on that topic, coming directly from someone who knows it inside and out and still has family over there, has really broadened my understanding of who he is and where he comes from. So I would agree with that. Okay. Also, he's a vegetarian as well. I'm not, but he took me to. Has anyone tried the Impossible Burger at Burger King before? I had never tried it, but he wanted me to try it because he goes to Burger King a lot to get it because he's a vegetarian. So he took me there. I tried it. It was okay. It wasn't like I got all the toppings on it, so it tasted just like a regular burger to me. But seeing that side of his culture or that background where he's a vegetarian and I'm not, and being able to experience things or see things from his point of view definitely broadened my understanding of that kind of lifestyle or those eating habits. So that was something that was very interesting to me. Okay, any other experiences any of you have had with diversity or positives that came from it? Yeah. Okay.
So there's sales from different countries. For example, from the Vietnam, from Korea, from
Mm-hmm.
French, from America,
Mm-hmm.
different countries. So for me, before I only focus on the product produced in China. So I
Mm-hmm.
sell this product to my customer.
Mm-hmm.
After we have the global sales team, then I know more products. So I have more sales in China because I know I can have more customers
Okay.
with more products.
Okay.
Yeah, true. I think it's really cool.
Do the way salespeople sell in each country differ based on the wants and needs of that country?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So every salesperson has to strategize how they're going to sell based on where they're selling.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Were you going to add something as well?
Yeah, I just, in a previous class I had,
Okay.
and they sort of gave me experience about how hard it was just to get around.
Okay. Okay.
That helped when I was like planning events for a job or something. I think
Yeah. 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 I can understand that. Physical disabilities bring a whole new mindset to how you do things or how you structure events to accommodate those people and how they view, just transporting from one place to the next, or it's a whole different worldview that opens your mind to yeah, the struggles of what other people deal with that we take for granted. Any other examples? Okay. Oh yeah, go ahead.
We were in a situation where we were working with composite materials.
Okay.
And so it was kind of a technical space.
Okay.
And there was a guy there who was really interested but had no technical training whatsoever.
Okay.
It was really easy just to dismiss it and move on.
Mm-hmm.
But the more we let him explore and question and figure things out,
Mm-hmm.
we learned a lot from him,
Mm-hmm.
just in his inquisitions.
Yeah.
And so that was really cool, just to let the creativity, let that diversity kind of
Mm-hmm.
happen. And it was, I think we all benefited.
Yeah, that's definitely a good, that's a good example. Yeah. Any others that you've had? I'm sure we all have had many. Could talk a whole class period about examples we've had with diversity and the benefits of those. Some of the challenges that play into this, hopefully none of you have these, but I know to an extent we all have built-in prejudices, and we'll look at that in a second. So these are some of the things that hurt diversity, or what can prevent diversity from becoming something that helps an organization. The first one is ethnocentrism, and this is just a belief that your culture or the group or whatever background that you're from is better or above everybody else, and so, or superior to other cultures. So has anyone experienced this before, where either you, maybe someone felt like they were above people because of who they were or what ethnic background they had? Okay, hopefully not. That's one that can challenge diversity, though, if you have people that have that belief that where I'm from and what I do and my values are above everybody else. The second one is prejudice, and this is feelings or opinions or adverse feelings or opinions formed without regard for the facts. Now, I would say that everyone to an extent has some sort of built-in prejudices. Now, not that you necessarily can grow out of those, but to some extent we can all at points be presented with facts and not necessarily disagree with them, but still have a strong opinion in another way. And so that kind of plays into prejudice. Stereotype, we hear this term a lot, where you take people from a certain group and make a broad generalization about who they are, what they do, whatever negative beliefs or images you have about that group of people, you put that as, you paint with a very broad stroke about that group of people, and that can be an issue. Another one is discrimination, and again, this kind of goes back to stereotype, but this is actually the action of, or acting upon your stereotypes, where you start treating people differently based on the stereotypes that you have for those people. And then finally, the glass ceiling. This is more discussed when we talk about males and females, but in society we hear a lot about an invisible barrier that females feel that once they reach a certain point in an organization or a business, they've gone as high as they can, and that women and minorities can only go so high before they start feeling like they've reached the ultimate point that they can. Okay, so on page 333, we're going to do an in-class activity, kind of focusing on what kind of biases you may have, or how you feel about these type of things. So if you'll get out a piece of paper and a pencil or some sort of writing apparatus or your computer, let's go through these. So there are 10 statements that we're going to read, and again, you're going to put mostly true or mostly false for these. So I'll read them 1 through 10, mostly true or mostly false, and you're going to be thinking about your typical day-to-day behavior when you answer these. Okay, so question or statement number 1, I prefer to be in work teams with people who think like me. Is that mostly true or mostly false? Number 2, I have avoided talking about culture differences with people I met from different cultures because I didn't want to say the wrong thing. Is that mostly true or mostly false? Number 3, my mind has jumped to a conclusion without first hearing all sides of a story. Number 4, the first thing I notice about people is the physical characteristics that make them different from the norm. Is that mostly true or mostly false? Number 5, before I hire someone, I have a picture in mind of what the person should look like. Is that mostly true or mostly false? Number 6, I typically ignore movies, magazines, and TV programs that are targeted toward groups and values that are different from mine. Is that mostly true or mostly false? Number 7, when someone makes a bigoted remark or joke, I don't confront them about it. Number 8, I prefer not to discuss sensitive topics such as race, age, gender, sexuality, or religion at work. Number 9, there are people I like but would feel uncomfortable inviting to be with my family or close friends. And number 10, if I were to seek a mentor, I would want someone culturally similar to myself. Okay, does anyone need me to repeat any of those? Okay, so for everyone that you marked mostly true, give yourself a point. So count up how many mostly trues you had, and then add up how many points you have. Okay, so the goal or the way this activity sets it up, if you have a 0, that should be the ideal score based on the way the textbook wants you to score. So anything close to 0, if you scored 3 or less, you're trying to eliminate your passive and unconscious bias. So the higher you go, 8, 9, 10, the more biased you are or the more unconscious you may be about the biases that you have in life. So does anyone want to share what score they got? So personally, I got a 5 on this. Some of the questions I could have gone either way. It ranged from a 4 to a 5 depending on how I interpreted the questions, which tells me that not necessarily that I have work to do, but the way I approach some of these situations would be different than other people for sure. So of these 10 questions, did any stand out to you as ones you struggled answering or ones that would make you feel uncomfortable if you did these on a daily basis? The one that stood out to me, or one of the ones that I marked mostly true for, was number 6, that I typically ignore movies, magazines, and TV programs that are targeted toward groups and values that are different from mine. I would say that's mostly true for me. That, again, not necessarily that I wouldn't watch or read or do those type of things, but I can watch a preview of a movie, or like, for instance, I'm not into superhero movies. I think they're silly and I don't watch them. So like all the Marvel movies, none of them could have ever been created and I wouldn't care. So to me, I watch those previews and they're of no interest to me. I know there's a segment of the population that loves those movies and they make record amounts of money all the time, and the acting is awesome and the special effects are awesome. But to me, I can watch those all day and it doesn't pique my interest at all. So that would be something that that's not the group, or I don't know necessarily the values, but that's just not something I'm interested in. So I would say mostly true for that. Same with, things that are more targeted toward females, movies that are targeted toward females or that kind of stuff. They're just, I'm not interested in those type of things. So, so number 6 stood out to me as one that was mostly true. And then number 8, I put mostly true for as well. I prefer not to discuss sensitive topics such as race, age, gender, sexuality, or religion at work. I would say that number 1, I'm just not real comfortable discussing those things. And number 2, I don't want to necessarily be looked down for or put into a box based on one of my beliefs in those areas, based on if I disagree or agree with somebody. And so I tend to keep those things to myself, unless I really know the person well enough and know that they're not going to either judge me or paint me in a certain way based on my beliefs. But I'm not a person that's just going to openly discuss those type of things in the workplace unless I feel very comfortable and know the people and I can trust and that they're going to respect me for my beliefs. So those 2 stood out to me. Any of the other ones that stood out to you or that you put mostly true for or mostly false for, based on who you are? Yeah.
I think they might know my background better.
Yeah.
Be able to guide me more, but I think different background.
Yeah.
Different perspectives.
Yeah. I think for number 10, I would agree. I think there are a lot of pros to having someone from a different background than you, but then there are some cons that they wouldn't necessarily know your story or background at the same time. So I think number 10 is tricky depending on how you view what a mentor means to you and what you're looking for from a mentor. So I would agree with that.
Four is almost, for me. I mean, it's just human nature.
Yeah, number 4.
But it's
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of how we naturally are.
Yeah. Like we mentioned, if I see someone that's physically disabled, that's going to be one of the first things I recognize right off the bat. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm going to form a certain stereotype about that person, but that is one of the first things I would recognize as well, or the different culture, different background, those type of things. I think that's just kind of a human response that, not that we let those early judgments totally affect us, but I think everyone makes judgments on the first impression with somebody. The other one too, this is one that number 5, before I hire someone, I have a picture in mind of what the person should look like. So I teach sport management courses at Carson Newman. That's kind of my area of expertise. And so in the next 2 or 3 years, the program's growing quickly enough that I'm going to have to add another professor, because I won't have the time and energy to teach all the different classes. So when I look at it, for better or worse, not that I would be against having a female teach courses, but in my mind, I immediately think, oh, guys like sports, guys love managing sports, so more than likely it's going to be a male. Now, again, that's not saying that I'm not going to look at females, but when I initially think about it, the first thing that pops into my head is a male. And so I put mostly true for that one, even though that picture is not something that's going to affect my overall choice of who that person's going to be. It's just the first thing I think about of what is this person going to look like, and that's just kind of how it looks in my mind. Any others that stood out to any of you, 1 through 10? Okay. Well, hopefully this helps you kind of identify areas where if you do have an unconscious bias about something, at least you're able to identify it. Now, some of these you may not be able to change. It's just ingrained in who we are as humans. And so, but to be aware of those, and if these things are affecting your ability to work with others or identify those differences and build upon them, hopefully you're able to kind of work through those and figure those out. Okay, so moving on to, this is a chart here which shows the differences or the beliefs in how men and women should be responsible for different things. So we can see here that based on surveys or based on beliefs, that when it comes to, and again, this is on page, let me just make sure, 335, if you want to look at it closer in the textbook. But based on surveys and reports, people believe that women at a 51% rate should be taking time off for work for child sickness, as opposed to men at 9%. The help with homework falls more on females. Organizing activities for children, females. Shop for groceries, again, female. Prepare meals, and then clean the house. So which of these stands out as one that you believe, as we continue to kind of evolve in the way we view males and females, is going to be the one that stands out, that's going to drastically change the most? Do any of these, taking time off for child sickness, help with homework, organizing activities, shop for groceries, prepare meals, and clean the house? Do any of those stand out and be like, that's definitely not something I see anymore as a difference between males and females? I think to an extent all of them are changing, and the views we have. I feel like I see a lot more men that are organizing activities for their children, whether it's sports or outdoor activities or whatever that may be. And then preparing meals seems like one nowadays that it doesn't matter if you're a male or female. That's kind of open for whatever. And so, but to me, all of these are changing, and it's pretty drastic how different these percentages are. I was pretty surprised by those and the way some people feel about that. So I'm going to skip this because we're running out of time, but I've got a lot I wanted to cover in this chapter. So some of the things that the textbook talks about, if you look on page 339 at this chart, 11.3, so what this looks at is leadership qualities that the textbook believes or says that women demonstrate at a higher rate than men. So some of those would be included in there is idolized influence, and this is where followers identify with and want to emulate the leader. That more females fall under this category, where people want to identify with and emulate the leader if they're a female. Another one is inspirational motivation. People feel that the emotional and symbolically ways that the leader leads appeal to more people, and they want to do a better job because of that. Another one is individual consideration, and this is where each follower is treated as an individual, but all are treated equitably. And then finally, intellectual stimulation, and this comes back to the idea of who is challenging people more, and what are they being challenged on as an employee. So in this chart here, women are higher or score higher than men on all of those categories, and then that leads to extra effort, effectiveness, and employee satisfaction. So we've looked at a lot of leadership styles in this class, but do you believe that leadership style is dependent on the sex of the leader, whether it's male or female? Have any of you worked for both genders before, and what differences did you see in leadership style? What stood out to you about the two?
I personally like male.
You like male leaders? Why is that?
Because normally, maybe, because I'm a female,
Mm-hmm.
another member of also female, maybe, sometimes the male leaders, they will more focus on the details.
Okay.
Sometimes too much focus on details maybe helps so good for the whole will
Okay.
the business or job.
Okay.
So
Okay.
My personal experience, I like the male.
Okay. Okay. Any differences any of you have seen in male to female, or any styles that seem to present themselves based on the sex of the leader?
People that I work for, it was, gonna be this individual that was, he was very direct and not
Okay.
checking several of these categories, which was fine.
Okay.
I liked her a
Yeah.
lot, never had any issues or anything
Yeah.
like that. But I think it's a lot of who the individual is.
Okay. So it's more individualized than necessarily if they're male or female. Okay. Okay. Anyone else that's seen, or differences or styles that you've seen in male leaders as opposed to female leaders that you've had? Okay. 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 I like that. I know, at least in my experience, I don't know how many of you know Dr. Knight, who's the head of the business department at Carson Newman, but she is someone who I feel like understands each of the faculty members, both inside and outside of work, a lot better than any of the male leaders I have ever had. She's more empathetic. She has children of her own, so she understands the time restrictions. So when she has meetings, she's very careful about scheduling them at times when everyone can meet, but also holding them to a certain amount of time so people can go and live their lives or do what they need to do, the priorities that they have in their personal lives. So again, that can be a detail that goes male or female, but at least from my perspective, she has been someone that empathizes or connects more with the personal side of us than any male leaders that I've had before. Okay, any other examples have you seen between male leaders and female leaders that you've had? Okay, so we're going to shift gears a little bit. We were looking at male to female. Now we're going to kind of look at different cultures. So I know I have a couple different cultures in this classroom, so I'll be interested to know how accurate this is. On page 343 of the textbook, it gives this list of different cultures and then the preferred style of handshakes based on that culture, since we all have different ways. So from an Asian perspective, it's more of a gentle. Shaking hands is unfamiliar and uncomfortable for Asians. The exception is the Korean, who usually prefers a firm handshake. Would you two agree that that's true, or is that not necessarily the case based on your experiences?
I think for the handshake, I think some Asian, I think it's okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have a culture shock. I have a friend,
Okay.
every time he saw me, he will kiss me.
Okay. Okay.
Really culture shock.
Okay. Yeah, that would be a culture shock for sure. For sure.
Where was he from? Where was he from?
He was French. Yeah, and they would have a different way to greet people, for sure.
This is also a benefit from the different culture, you know.
You understand.
Not in China, there we are not handsome, gentlemen will kiss you.
Okay.
But from Frenchman, I can have the benefit, yeah.
Yeah, the way you approach people and greet people across the world is different. So it's quite a difference. The British preferred style of handshake is soft. Ollie, would you say that's not true? What's different from what they say? You would say more firm? Okay. And they say North American is the same way down there at the bottom. So maybe, I don't know who they talked to put this together, but that's what they said. French, A light and quick, repeated on arrival and departure, not offered to superiors. German, brusque and firm, repeated on arrival and departure. Latin American, moderate grasp, repeated frequently. And then Middle Eastern, gentle, repeated frequently. And then North American is firm. So how many of you have worked with the different cultures here? And if you would say this is accurate with the people that you've worked with before, or inaccurate? How many of you have been in situations where you've had to greet someone from a different culture and had no idea what to do, or question in your head, am I doing the right thing? I know I have. I've been on a couple missions trips to Honduras, and you know, greeting children especially, it's hard to know what are the cultural ways to, like, can I give them a high five? Am I allowed to make any sort of physical contact? Can I give kids a hug? Can I shake their, like, it's very, it's hard to know sometimes what the cultural, what's acceptable when it comes to either physical touches or embraces or things like that. So even just greeting and saying hello to someone can be a challenge. Any examples that any of you have had with greeting someone from a different culture?
In the Middle East, when I was over there, you do not try to shake hands or even acknowledge a female.
Okay.
It's an affront that they don't appreciate.
Okay, so if you were to come face to face with a female, it's almost like they're not there, or
Certainly don't extend a hand to shake a hand, not at all.
okay, so in the Middle East, that's a huge difference culturally. Then that's and that comes back to religion a little bit too, right? That's kind of built into their religious beliefs.
I don't mean to say, like, engage in conversation, yes.
Okay.
They're not there, but when it comes to a greeting or a farewell,
Okay.
there's no contact.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's a great example. Any other experiences that any of you had with greeting or socializing with people from a different culture? I know in some cultures, eye contact is viewed differently. I know here in America, we encourage eye contact, especially in one-on-one conversations. I know in some cultures, though, looking at someone in the eye or making that long eye contact can be seen as offensive or unusual. So that can come into play as well. Any other examples? Okay, I just thought that was an interesting one. I'm glad some of you were able to share whether that's true or not. Again, I'm not sure where they got all that data, but that is interesting. So globalization has caused managers to confront a broader range of issues, and social and cultural differences can cause conflict. I know we've talked about some of these before, like with language barriers or just the way you interact with people. But what are some of the major social and cultural differences that can cause conflict? Any that stand out or come to mind? Any specific cultures that the differences in that culture and how that can cause conflict?
Work-life balance between different
Work and life balance, I would agree with that. Yeah.
countries put a whole lot more weight on work and staying longer, a lot more so than it tends to happen here.
Yeah, I know, again, this is more stereotypical, but I think a lot of the world, and for the most part it's true, is that Americans are very focused on work and very focused on money and rank and prestige and, you know, what you can get from, you know, bigger house, bigger cars, things like that. So built into our culture a little bit, that based on stereotypes, that would be a difference. Holidays. Yeah, today's Yom Kippur. I don't know if anyone has Jewish relatives or anything. I had a student email me this morning telling me he couldn't be in class because they're not allowed to do anything basically on Yom Kippur. So he wasn't able to come to class. We had an online assignment, so they're not allowed to use electronics on Yom Kippur. So he wasn't able to do that as well. So that's a good example. But yeah, holidays are a big one.
When we were on that project in the Middle East, we had a huge logistical challenge. We were moving parts from northern to central Iraq, and we would say, and when we were scheduling things out, we would say, okay, we're going to have these assets in this location by this date. Can you have people there to meet us?
Yeah.
And the response was always, inshallah, means God willing. And I'm saying, I get it. But just tell me someone's going to be there, please.
Yeah.
Tell me someone's going to be there.
Yeah. The way logistics and timing are viewed, some cultures are very set, and some are more laid back, and, you know, being 15 minutes late, what's the big deal? You know, some cultures, 15 minutes early is being on time, and being on time is late. Every culture is different based on that. Yeah. Boy, that would get frustrating, I imagine.
We're not talking 15 minutes, we're talking like 2 weeks.
2 weeks, yeah, that would be quite a challenge for sure. Okay, we won't look at this. If you want to look at this chart, it talks about value systems and some of the things that play into different countries. It's on page 343. So if you want to look at that, you can, to look at some of those different things. These are the categories that play into that chart. So we'll look at these briefly, but these are the value systems that chart focuses on. The first one is power distance. So how much people accept equality in power? Is there a huge difference in the people most in power all the way down to the least? Or is it more kind of put together where the power difference is not that large, that those at the highest to those at the lowest is kind of smushed together? Uncertainty avoidance, this is the degree to which members of society feel uncomfortable with uncertainty and ambiguity, and thus support beliefs and behaviors that promise certainty and conformity. So that's another one. Individualism, this is huge in America. I think it's number one. Yeah, it's the number one country when it comes to this value system, where value for a loosely knit social framework in which individuals are expected to take care of themselves. That's really big here in America. Collectivism, this is on the total opposite, where everyone's kind of in it together, and how we can succeed is as a unit, not necessarily as an individual. Two value systems, so moving on to the next part, masculinity and femininity. So traditionally, masculinity has been viewed as a preference for achievement, heroism, assertiveness, work centrality, and material success. And traditionally, femininity has been preferences for relationships, cooperation, group decision-making, and quality of life. So again, these are more traditional views. So based on these lists here, which of these do you feel like, as we go on, or from what you've experienced, maybe don't necessarily fall under either of those anymore, but have become more of a fused together between the two, or maybe one that's in the wrong category based on this list? I would say, so for instance, for me, when I hear the word assertiveness that's connected with masculinity, I feel like females nowadays are becoming much more assertive, and that their ideas and beliefs are being heard at a higher level. So I would say nowadays that instead of that being a masculinity value, that I feel like that's, at least here in America, that's more of a cultural value, that regardless of male or female, your ideas are warranted, and that it's becoming more mainstream for females to be in leadership positions where their ideas and beliefs are being heard at a greater level. So that would be one that I would say is more ambiguous nowadays. Any of these others, or other things in general that you would say, you know, are more ambiguous today and not necessarily as much categorized in this value system? Yeah, I would agree with that. Relationships, you know, you always hear if like when it comes to, yeah, networking or when it comes to references or things like that. I feel like males and females both, that's a vital piece to succeed. And it's not necessarily just for females, that it's needed on both, yeah. Any others? Okay, real briefly, let me see. I'm going to skip cultural intelligence. If you want to look at that, I believe there's a, let me see here. There is a chart. Yeah, we're not going to look at this. Real quick, though, before we finish up, I think I just have a couple. Okay, we'll finish with this. So Exhibit 11.6, which is on page 346, this is a chart that describes how important is it for managers to have precise answers to most questions for their subordinates at work. So in some cultures, such as you can see here, it's scored above 70%. Indonesia, Spain, and Japan scored over 70% for how important it is that bosses or leaders have the answers to all questions in a workforce environment. You can see down at the other end, Sweden, Netherlands, and United States, it's not necessarily as important for them to have the answers. Now, having said that, I think it's important that even if you don't have the answer, you need to know where you can find the answer. But as you can see here, the expertise, how important is it for leaders to be the experts, is highly important in certain cultures. How many agree or disagree or have experienced this kind of thing based on their background? Is this true? Mm-hmm.
Because in our previous chapter,
Yeah.
like they don't know everything.
Yeah.
I'm like, this is
I would agree with that. I think the United States is about right because nowadays leaders have so many aspects of their job relating to the workers, forming relationships and communication, that necessarily knowing everything about everything is not as important. So I would agree with that. Okay, anyone else based on the results of this that would agree or disagree or surprised by anything on here? Okay, let me just look here and see if there's anything else that, okay. If you want to look at the rest, there's about 5 slides left in here that describe a couple of ideas from this chapter. We will stop there for this chapter though. So just so you know, for chapter 11, the assignments for this chapter begin on page 352. So for chapter 11, the leadership at work, it starts on 352 and it ends on 353. So you'll have those questions to answer for the discussion board. And then the case study for this chapter is The Trouble with Bengals, which starts on page 355 and ends on 356 with 3 questions for that case study. Are there any questions on chapter 11? And again, those will be due Sunday at midnight. This will be the last week, as I said earlier, where we will have discussion boards and case studies. So this is the last week for those. Again, the last week is only going to be the paper and the exam. So make sure to get those done as well. Also, I was going to say this at the beginning of class, and I forgot to do this. If you have any outstanding assignments that you have not yet submitted, I will still accept those. Now, obviously, I'm not going to give you full credit. You can earn a percent, though, depending on which week it was. So I'm going to, again, try to get everything graded this week or close to it. But if there are any outstanding assignments that you haven't turned in yet, you can receive partial credit for those if you need to turn those in still. Okay, let's take a break. Let me see what time it is. 8:09. Let's come back at 8:20. Gives you 11 minutes, and we'll do chapter 12.
They've changed since then, any more places to do it? Places that kind of, it was nice to get listed different places, depending on how they. Now, is that still accurate? Yes, it took a little clicking around for a while, but I found what it was talking about. It's like 3 or 4 pages. I mean, that's scattered. Mile radius, all direction, all sorts of.
Down there getting my office and had to when I was having it like Monday, 2 weeks from today, May, I had a discussion with the society. Good conversation over it wasn't the same mistake. It was, I think there's some pretty cool opportunities for us to really innovate some stuff for society. I mean, certainly time. And the last thing that's bad, but I can't help it. It'll end up being September 22. Oh, well, it'll end up now being January. We can't wait. Well, it's gonna be March, July, and September, November, not January.
Okay, are we still good in Jefferson City? You can hear me and see the PowerPoint? Awesome. Okay. So let's do chapter 12 now. We're going to be talking about leadership, power, and influence. So the learning objectives for this chapter are to use power in politics to help accomplish important organizational goals, practice aspects of charismatic leadership by pursuing a vision or idea that you care deeply about and want to share with others, apply the concepts that distinguish transformational from transactional leadership, use coalitional leadership to build alliances that can help you achieve important goals for the organization, call upon characteristics of Machiavellian-style leadership when tough actions are needed to benefit the organization in difficult times, explain the difference between soft power and hard power, and identify specific types of power in organizations. And then the final page, describe structural human resource, political, and symbolic frames of reference and identify your dominant leadership frame, and know how to increase power through political activity and use the influence tactics of appealing to a higher vision, rational persuasion, friendliness, reciprocity, developing allies, and direct persuasion. Okay, before we get into some of the details of this chapter, to just kind of focus our ideas and thoughts on this topic. So how would you all define power? What comes to mind when you hear the word power? Either words or phrases? Something you use? Okay. Okay. How else would you define or key words or concepts or phrases that come to mind when you hear power? The ability to change your environment. Okay, I like that. Any other ideas for power? Okay, how about the term influence? When you hear the term influence, what comes to mind? How would you define influence, or keywords or phrases that come to mind when you hear that? So leadership to an extent, okay.
It's the ability to change people's positions or stances on something.
Okay. So changing others and their beliefs or stances on things, okay. Trust, okay. Okay, so looking at power and influence, what would you say are the differences between those two? Between power and influence?
No power, no influence.
Power what?
No power, no influence.
So the more power you have, the more influence you have? Okay.
Influence tends to imply that it's a little bit more passive than, say, power.
Okay. Okay.
Maybe if I was in a position of power, I could almost force you to do something. But
Sure.
if I influenced you, it would be more of your own decision to do that.
Okay. So power could be looked at as more of a force, depending on the situation. Influence is more of a literal change of heart or mind by that person instead of being forced to change. Okay? Any other differences between power and influence?
Power is more quantifiable, like I could have the power to fire you.
Okay, so power is more quantifiable. I think that's true based on your position. That for sure is true. One of the big differences, I think, is that power is usually positional. Who's over who, who's the boss of who, and that creates the way that people do things or the way objectives are set out. Influence, in my opinion, can come from almost anyone at any level, and it can go up or down depending on the situation. Based on power, your boss has power over you, but influence, you can have an influence over your boss. So power is usually top down. Influence can be bottom up or left to right. It can be really any direction. Any other differences between the two, power and influence? Okay. We're going to look at a couple different types of influential leadership now. So looking more at influence and how that plays a role in leadership. So 4 of the categories we're going to look at are transformational, transactional, charismatic, and coalitional. And we'll look at these each in a little bit more detail. On page, well, let me go to this next page first and then we'll look at the textbook. So the first one is transformational leadership, and this is a type of influential leadership that is characterized by the ability to bring about significant change in followers and the organization. Now, the textbook talks about some of the ways that this can play out. So on page 363, it has 4 significant areas that play into transformational leadership, as opposed to, well, let me describe transactional first. So transformational is, like I said, ability to bring about significant change in followers and the organization. Transactional is that it's more of an exchange process between leaders and followers, so more of a give and take or something of that nature. So what separates transformational from transactional? On page 363, it gives 4 points to that. So the first one says that transformational leadership paints a grand vision of a desired future and communicates it in a way that makes the pain of change worth the effort. So again, instead of exchanging, we want to move in this direction, so if you're willing to give us this in order to get us there, that's more transactional. Transformational is setting this vision based on influence where you don't necessarily have to exchange things. It's more of a broad way to look at it. The second one is that transformational leadership inspires followers to go beyond their own self-interests for the good of the group. Again, looking at transactional, sometimes looking back at extrinsic and intrinsic benefits. In a transactional setting, those benefits need to exist in order for people to work hard. in a transformational setting, that goes above necessarily their own self-interest to the overall success of the business or organization. Number 3 is that transformational leadership elevates the concerns of followers from lower level physical needs, such as safety and security, to higher level psychological needs, such as for self-esteem and self-actualization. So again, looking back at Maslow's hierarchy of needs and some of those things that we looked at a couple weeks ago, once you've explained, or once people feel comfortable that they have job security, that they can, you know, put food on the plate for their families, that they have shelter and whatever else you need. Once people start realizing that you can start looking at their self-esteem, self-actualization, finding out who they are as individuals, that's when you've led in a transformational way and not necessarily just transactional. And then finally, transformational leadership develops followers into leaders. We talked about this a little bit when we looked at, what's the term I'm looking for? I'm blanking on it. But anyway, when we look at not just people doing their jobs and not putting them in leadership roles, but empowerment. That's the term I was looking for. Empowering your employees to take on roles and responsibilities that challenge them to do things maybe they've never done before, or to make them more knowledgeable in a certain situation. So making followers into leaders is another example and category of transformational leadership. Okay, and we already, actually I just described these, I should have shown you these, but this talks about transactional leadership, and then the 4 points that I just gave on transformational leadership are right there as well. Okay, on page 364, if you would all turn there, there is an in-class activity, the Leader's Self-Insight 12.1. So we're going to look at transformational leadership, and what I need you to do, there's going to be 12 statements here, but what you need to do is think of a situation in which someone, it could be a boss, a coach, a teacher, a group leader, was in a leadership position over you, and you're going to answer these questions based on that situation that you remember. 364. Okay, so I'll read these statements, and then you're going to answer mostly true or mostly false for these. So number 1, the person listened carefully to my concerns. Is that mostly true or mostly false? Number 2, this person showed conviction in his or her values. Mostly true or mostly false? Number 3, this person helped me focus on developing my strengths. Mostly true or mostly false? Number 4, this person was enthusiastic about our mission. Number 5, this person provided coaching advice for my development. Number 6, this person talked optimistically about the future. Number 7, this person encouraged my self-development. Number 8, this person fostered a clear understanding of important values and beliefs. Number 9, this person provided feedback on how I was doing. Number 10, this person inspired us with his or her plans for the future. Number 11, this person taught me how to develop my abilities. And then number 12, this person gained others' commitment to his or her dream. Okay, so looking at the odd statements, so 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, and 11, sum up how many of those you put mostly true for. So the odd numbers 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, and 11, tally up and sum how many mostly true statements you put, and give yourself a score for that. And then for 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, and 12, if you put mostly true for those, tally those up and give yourself a score for those even ones. And this score is actually going to be a view of your leader and not necessarily you, because all these questions were about a leader that you've had. So for the odd questions, 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, and 11, that score will determine how well your leader was at developing followers into leaders. So did anyone have, let's see, there would have been 6 or above. Did anyone have a 5 or a 6 for that? Okay, so a couple of you. Did anyone have a 0, 1, or a 2 for that? Okay, so we've got a broad spectrum there. Okay, for the even numbered questions, if you scored higher, that would have been for inspires followers to go beyond their own self-interest. So did anyone have a 5 or a 6 for that one? Okay, did anyone have a 0, 1, or 2 for that one? Okay. So looking at these questions and the scores that you got, does anyone want to give a specific one of these that you looked at, statements 1 through 12, as to where your leader really was strong or where they were not very strong? Like, for instance, number 7, for me, I know at Carson Newman, with the department I work at, encouraging my self-development, they are all about that. That is something that in the business department is a huge focus on self-development, studying whatever field you're interested in or the things that you teach, and they provide as many resources as you need in order to be successful in what you teach and how you learn what you teach. So that's something that I've seen at Carson Newman is very strong. Any of these others that stood out to you, or personal examples of how they've fit with your roles before? Number 5, provided coaching advice for my development. Was that a mostly true or mostly false? Mostly true. Okay. Do you have an example of how that looked in that role?
Reviewing job applications.
Okay.
Or with me in cover letters.
Okay. Okay. Any of these others that stood out to you? For those of you that had 6 or 5 for one of these 2 scores, what does that look like? Or how could you tell that that's the type of leader that you had over you? Were there characteristics about that leader that really stick out to you? Happy when you go to work? Yep. Any other characteristics or things you remember? Or maybe you're in that position now that stand out to you? Okay, if you had a 0, 1, or 2 for any of those, or for either of these scores, what are the characteristics of that, or how does that look, or how did it look in your role with that leader? Kind of going off what Ollie said, I worked, like I said, in an admissions department in another university, and the focus was so much on numbers that I felt like the only reason I was there was to hit the numbers, and that there was no sort of development or worry about what my strengths were. It was all about how many applicants are you getting in, how many campus visits, how many people are paying their tuition deposits, and there was no focus on developing me to do, to develop or the only feedback I got was either you're doing great because you're meeting your numbers, or you're not doing great because you're not meeting your numbers. And there was no, the transformational leadership wasn't there. Anyone else who scored a 0, 1, or 2 on one of these that wants to share what that felt like or the characteristics of that leader?
When I was a leader, we had a leader.
Okay.
Like she'd say, someone like Allie up on it.
Uh-huh.
And that sort of made it feel like I
Okay.
at school keeping things.
So she would keep track of mistakes, but not necessarily like successes or, okay. Yeah. Mhm. Yeah. It's just treading water. Yeah. Okay. Is that the term you said? Kind of treading water. Okay. Okay. Any of these other statements that stood out to you or anything about this that you found intriguing? Hopefully all of you at some point in your life have leaders, or if when all of you, I think all of you will be in leadership roles someday, are able to look at this and say that either I work for someone that scores a 5 or a 6, or I'm a leader who is a transformational leader that scores 5 or 6 on this. And I think these are some good goals to focus on as you look at that. Now, if you have leaders that you either work for now that are a 0, 1, or 2, I can understand that's very frustrating and probably lowers the respect level you feel for them and that they feel for you. So that's got to be pretty difficult. But I've been kind of all over the spectrum on this one. So let's move on to charismatic leaders. This doesn't necessarily mean that the leaders have all the knowledge in the world like we looked at in the previous chapter. Americans don't necessarily require leaders to have all the answers and all the necessary information. In another way, though, a charismatic leader is someone who has the ability to inspire and motivate people to do more than they would normally do, despite obstacles and personal sacrifice. So they may not have all the answers to everything, but they know what it takes to motivate others and inspire them to do better. How many of you have worked for leaders before that you would say, yeah, they probably didn't know everything that they needed to know, or they delegated a lot of stuff that they probably should have done, but when it came to charismatic leadership, they were really successful? Has anyone worked for anyone like that before? Okay. So a couple characteristics of someone who leads from a charismatic point of view. First of all, they can instill both awe, where you look at this person and say, oh my goodness, they are, I would follow them into battle. I would, fall on the sword for this person. But also on the negative side, that sometimes that can lead to submission, where you feel so attracted to the way they influence and inspire that you almost get caught in, I don't want to say a cultish atmosphere, but one where you almost don't focus on things that need to be focused on. And it can become sort of a submissive type of interaction between you and them because you're so inspired by them and who they are and how they motivate people. It can lift the entire organization's level of energy and performance. Have any of you worked, I know I already asked if you've worked for a leader like this, but is there a moment in time when you can think of that a leader inspired the whole organization or group of people, either through a speech or an email or something of that nature? Does anything come to mind? Okay. The next one is that charisma can't be learned, but aspects can be used by anyone. Okay, so this is one that I'm not sure if I agree with or not. How many would agree with the statement or disagree that charisma can't be learned? You would disagree? Okay. 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 You would agree with it can't be learned?
Yeah.
Okay.
It comes from something, you have passion for something,
Mm-hmm.
really rooted in that you're really into it.
Okay.
You can think it,
Okay.
try and get the benefits from it, but I don't know that
Okay. Okay.
It can be developed much like leadership, I think.
Okay.
So yeah, you have the enthusiasm, get more excited about it, you get better at.
Yeah,
I think it's
I get what you mean.
In some people.
In some people.
yeah.
What are some, I mean, give me some personal examples of either activities or situations that you as an individual are passionate about, and when put in those situations, you feel that you're more charismatic because of those passions that you have. Anything come to mind?
What's the meaning for the charismatic?
Charismatic is just outgoing or expressing more emotions about a certain topic, or people, you're not just saying things, but people feel, they can tell you really feel what you mean. It's more than just words. There's just that gut feeling that what they're saying, they really believe that, and they have a conviction about that, and that's kind of how they lead. Yeah, they draw you in. Has anyone, does anyone have, again, something that you have an interest or passion in that either when you talk about it or if you're leading a certain group, you feel like you have more charisma in that situation? No? Or at least you don't want to share? Okay.
Maybe the church.
In church?
When you go to the church, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say pastors or religious leaders from the pulpit may not be very charismatic in their normal life, everyday life, but when they get up there and start reading from the scriptures or start talking about some topic from their religious background, that charisma comes out. Yeah. Yeah, you can tell they have a real passion for that. Okay, any of you feel that same way? Okay. Yeah, definitely think about that, because I think charismatic leadership, I go back and forth on whether charisma can or can't be learned. I think some people, yeah, are just born with that charisma, but then like it says here, depending on the situation, depending on the activity that you have a passion for, sometimes that charisma can be developed as you learn more about yourself and what you have passions for. So I kind of go back and forth on that one, but I think it's interesting that the textbook says it can't be, when I kind of go back and forth on that topic. Okay, so a couple characteristics. This chart is on page 365 if you want to look at this a little closer in the textbook. Some of the characteristics that they talk about are likability, relation to status quo, future goals, articulation, behavior, and influence. The one I wanted to look at was articulation, because I think that this kind of goes back to the communication chapter that we looked at. For the most part, at least from my point of view, the way someone communicates, you can tell very quickly whether they're non-charismatic or charismatic. And so when I read there that non-charismatic leaders have weak articulation of goals and motivation to lead, and charismatic leaders have strong and inspirational articulation of vision and motivation to lead, I look at that as probably the most important characteristic out of these 6 that it lists here. Would you agree or disagree, or are any of these other 6 that you look at and say that there's a huge gap between that characteristic when it comes to charismatic and non-charismatic? Okay. Okay. Okay, I would agree with that. Any of these others stand out? Or things that you've seen from charismatic leaders or non-charismatic that you would say, yeah, I've definitely seen how that plays out when it comes to charismatic leadership.
I think the likability.
Likability.
Big with charismatic leaders.
Yeah, I would agree with that. If people really get passionate about something, even if it's maybe not something that you're that interested in, you still appreciate the passion that they have for that thing. And so, yeah, I would agree with that. Yes.
I can't read that so much. I mean, but charismatic leaders, they kind of like, almost like atmosphere about it.
Okay.
Like, you just kind of want to be around them.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree with that. It kind of goes into likability, but then, yeah, people that just have that positive nature or are very influential, I would agree that they have a power to draw people into them. Okay. The last one is coalitional leadership. This is leadership that involves developing allies and building a coalition of people who support the leader's goals and can help influence others to implement the leader's decisions and achieve the goals. Now, in my opinion, this is something that can be really good or really bad depending on the situation. What I mean by that is, obviously it's important to build up a group around you that believes in what you're talking about and is able to stand up for you and support you in your goals. On the other hand, though, I could see this being a negative if you get people who maybe disagree with you or don't feel like they have a voice. Now there's a barrier of these people around the leader who you're never going to get to the leader to express your opinions because they have built this barrier of allies around them that all are expressing the same thing. Now, I think for the most part, this is a good thing, but I can see this becoming a bad thing if used in the wrong way to create those barriers between the leader and the followers. So some of the things that it talks about for coalitional leadership are that leaders in this observe and understand patterns of interaction and influence in the organization. They develop connections with a broad network of people. And then they also, failing to build a coalition can allow conflict to derail a leader's decision. Now, how many of you have ever been in a situation where coalitional leadership existed? Where maybe you were one of the allies of the leader, or you felt like you and the leader were in a direct connection when it came to those goals or objectives, and then if someone underneath had issues with the leader, you spoke up and defended the leader. Has anyone experienced that before? A little bit? Okay. Yeah, so that's something that coalitional leadership is really important to build that. So a couple steps here. We won't look at this very quickly. The one I want to, well, I'll read through them, and then there's the last two that I want to focus on. But it talks about steps for effective coalitional leadership. First of all, do a lot of interviews, visit customers and stakeholders, develop a map of stakeholder buy-in, and break down barriers and promote cross-silo cooperation. So the third one there, develop a map of stakeholder buy-in. What I believe they mean by that is to have advocates. And so you have people that are going to advocate for your beliefs and what you stand for. And then the last one, break down barriers and promote cross-silo cooperation. So this can be where people from different departments, different divisions, different levels, they don't feel like they can't buy in and be part of the charismatic leadership, so to speak, that they feel like they can be just as affected or just as effective as those above them to buy in and become part of the energy of the organization. And so that's another thing that plays into coalitional leadership as well. Okay, we're going to skip that part. The next thing I want to look at, let me just see how many. Okay. All right. So looking at Machiavellian style leadership. I'm guessing all of you have probably chosen your leadership theories for your final paper, but I find this one fairly fascinating and probably one that we could discuss for a long time if we wanted to. This is the idea, Machiavellian style leadership is the idea that the leader is willing to use any means necessary to preserve and protect the well-being of the organization. And sometimes this can become down to forceful or bare-knuckle strategies to attain clout needed to accomplish great things. The basic idea is that the means justify the ends. If you get the conclusions or the outcomes that you're looking for, it doesn't matter how you get there. And so whatever it takes to get to the place that you want to be, that's what you have to do to make that happen. So looking at a couple characteristics here that the textbook talks about. First of all, people that are always on their guard for risks and threats to their power. If they feel like there are risks or threats to their power, they have to somehow either get rid of those or overpower those in order for that not to happen. They don't mind being feared. Again, if they get to where they need to get to, then it doesn't matter to them whether they're feared or not, as long as they get to where they want to get. Use deception if necessary, and then finally use rewards and punishments to shape behavior. Okay, on page 370, we're going to do an in-class activity. So turn to that. And it talks here about figuring out how much of this style of leadership you may have. So the instructions here say that leaders differ in how they view human nature and the tactics they use to get things done through others. So you're going to answer the following questions based on how you view others. Think carefully about each question and be honest about what you feel inside. Okay, so there's 10 statements here. For each one, again, you're going to write mostly true or mostly false for your answers. So number 1, overall, it is better to be humble and honest than to be successful and dishonest. I'll read that one again because there's 2 parts to that. So overall, it is better to be humble and honest than to be successful and dishonest. Number 2, if you trust someone completely, you are asking for trouble. Mostly true or mostly false. Number 3, a leader should take action only when it is morally right. Number 4, a good way to handle people is to tell them what they like to hear. Number 5, there is no excuse for telling a white lie to someone. Number 6, it makes sense to flatter important people. Number 7, most people who get ahead as leaders have led very moral lives. Most people who get ahead as leaders have led very moral lives. Number 8, it is better to not tell people the real reason you did something unless it benefits you to do so. Let me read that again. It is better to not tell people the real reason you did something unless it benefits you to do so. Number 9, the vast majority of people are brave, good, and kind. The vast majority of people are brave, good, and kind. And number 10, it is hard to get to the top without sometimes cutting corners. Okay, does anyone need me to repeat any of those, 1 through 10? Okay, so looking at the odd questions, 1, 3, 5, 7, and 9, if you put mostly false for 1, 3, 5, 7, or 9, give yourself a point. And then for 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10, if you answered mostly true, give yourself a point. So for the odd questions, if you put mostly false, give yourself a point. If for the even questions, you put mostly true, give yourself a point. And then total your points up. So you could have up to 10 points, obviously. Okay. How many of you scored 8 to 10 points on this? Did anyone score 8 to 10? Yeah, combined. Okay. Did anyone score between, let's go 6 or 7? Did anyone get a 6 or a 7? Okay. Anyone in the 4 to 5 range? Okay. Anyone in the 1, 0, 1, 2, or 3? Okay. Okay. So which of these questions, well, first of all, the higher your score, the higher that this textbook would say you rank or you view Machiavellian beliefs as okay, or the way you view tactics to get things done through others. So preferentially, the lower your score, the better. But some of these questions can be kind of difficult depending on the situation. So which of these questions stood out, or maybe you had difficulty answering, or you felt like you had a conviction strongly one way or the other? Number 8.
Real clear on, I mean, that's a meeting, don't want to lie, doesn't benefit you, that's telling somebody other than.
Yeah, that one's kind of grayish. I don't know. How did the rest of you feel about that questioner? Number 8, it is better to not tell people the real reason you did something unless it benefits you to do so. How did the rest of you interpret that question?
Stop after the first part. It's better to tell people the real reason. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, stop there.
Yeah.
It is.
Well, that was, doing something.
Yeah.
From a facilities background, so I'm looking at it that way.
Yeah.
If I get into with all the resources in my building, while I'm doing X, Y, and Z,
Mm-hmm.
instead of just saying, I've got to shut this down
Mm-hmm.
for these 3 hours a day, or shutting power off, whatever.
Yeah.
When you start getting into we're doing this and this is why, it just opens up a lot of questions and more, if you're inviting more issues. That's
Yeah.
a general rule, but if you just say, hey, I can do this, take care of it.
Yeah. For number 8, I think there are situations where the less you tell people, the better. And then there's some where the more you tell people, the better. So I would agree with that. Yeah.
Number 10 was kind of tricky.
Number 10, it is hard to get to the top without sometimes cutting corners.
The top wall.
Yeah. Yeah. It can be difficult. I mean, I kind of get your point of view on that. I think the one that I kind of focused on was number 6. It makes sense to flatter important people. Not necessarily that I don't that I don't try to compliment you guys or things like that. But I would say it's easier for me, or maybe it's like, if I see the president of Carson Newman University walking around, I'm more likely to, make some comment, or if I'm in their office, like, wow, I like your office, or things like that. The higher prestige somebody is, I think the more willing, or more, the better chance it is that I'm probably going to say something to flatter that person or show that I recognize something about them that highlights them to, I guess, gain some sort of favor in their eyes. Maybe I would say that's something that I do, or at least when I read this, I'm like, yeah, that kind of makes sense to me.
It says it makes sense
Yeah.
Put it if I would.
Yeah. 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 I would say the one that I disagree with the most is number 7. Most people who get ahead as leaders have led very moral lives. There's many leaders out there that I would look at and say that person is a terrible person, whether in their personal life or in the way they handle business. And so I would say for that one, I put mostly false, but totally false, because there are some very strong leaders that live very moral lives, but there are also some that are just terrible people. Yeah.
I agree, but
Okay.
I think the people that you're on about hold positions of power, but I wouldn't necessarily.
Okay.
I think
So
there's a difference.
I would understand that. So you would say that for a person to truly have a leadership role, they've lived moral lives, or along those lines?
Yeah.
Okay.
You don't have to be in a power position to be a leader.
Okay. Okay. Okay, I can see it taken that way, so I understand that point of view. Okay. Any of these others that stood out to you that you completely agreed with, or say, yeah, that's something that I do, or ones that you would say, no, that's definitely false?
Number 5.
Number 5, which way do you feel on that one?
Kind of get into the.
Okay.
When I answered that one.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, I'm wrong, however,
Yeah.
there really no, not be straightforward, I guess.
Yeah. I think,
People's feelings at times.
yeah, I heard a good joke, and I think it's funny, that this one parent did not want to buy their son or daughter, ice cream from an ice cream truck. And so they told their child that when the ice cream truck is playing music, then the ice cream truck is out of ice cream. So I think that's pretty funny. Oh, they're playing their music, they're out. They don't have anything left. So that, I go,
I think they could have rephrased it.
yeah.
I think they could have said, I'm a white lie to someone good, and then
Yeah.
mostly false and mostly true.
I would,
There is no excuse.
yeah.
Yeah, those absolute words really.
Yeah.
Absolute words with half
Slow my
answer,
answer down.
mostly true, mostly
Yes.
false.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very vague on some of these. Absolutely. Yeah. Any of these others that stood out to you? Okay. Well, I think that's good. Hopefully you're able to identify some of those things in your life. And again, though this is a leadership style, and one that a lot of people have written books on and things. And so I would encourage you to look at it more if you want to. Okay. So we've looked at influence a little bit, different ways that leaders can influence people. Now we're going to look at power a little bit. So power, as the textbook defines it, is the potential ability of one person to influence other people to bring about desired outcomes. Now there's 2 types. The first one is hard power. This stems from a person's position of authority. The other one is based on personal characteristics and interpersonal relationships. So I know of many people that might have some sort of power over others just because of the relationships that they've formed, or because of characteristics of that person as an individual. So just keep that in mind. And then finally, well, not finally, but as we get near the end, influence we've already defined it, but again, as opposed to power, is the effect a person's actions have on the attitudes, values, beliefs, and actions of others. This exhibit here, it's on page, if you want to look at it closer, 373 in the textbook, gives 5 different types of power from a leadership point of view, and where those categories fall when it comes to the idea of hard or soft power. So legitimate power comes down to the formal position of somebody, and that would be, again, something under hard power. Reward power is based on if the leader can give rewards to a person or not. And again, that would come down to positional power or hard power. And then coercive power. This is to punish or recommend punishment, or to have people follow orders to avoid punishments. Again, that would fall under hard power. Soft power would be more of a situation where someone is an expert in some field. They may not necessarily have a position of power, but because of their expertise in something, they're able to influence others and lead others. And then also referent power. This is, again, based on personal characteristics. Is it somebody that people admire? Is it someone that people respect? Is it someone that people like to be around? And is it someone that people easily adopt the viewpoints of that person? And those both fall under soft power. So those are things I know some of you might be in leadership positions, but always remember, even if you're not in a positional power of leadership, you can still have influence and power over others based on how well you know what you're supposed to know, and also how much people like you, like being around you, and respect you and admire you as a person. So never feel like you don't have the opportunity to gain some sort of power or influence others just because you don't necessarily have a position to do it. So keep that in mind. Now, based on power, this is from a follower's point of view. The textbook defines 3 ways that you can respond to somebody in power. So the first one is that you show compliance, that you follow the directions of this person. Whether or not you agree with that person or their direction, you go along with them. That's one reaction. The next one is resistance. This is the act of disobeying orders or deliberately avoiding carrying out instructions from that person. Those would both fall under the positional power chart, which if you want to look at that, it's on page 375 of the textbook. So positional power, you can either use it appropriately and get compliance, or use it excessively and get non-compliance or resistance. And then going back to commitment, this is adopting the leader's viewpoint and enthusiastically carrying out instructions. And this, again, goes back to the idea of soft power, where the person doesn't necessarily have a position of leadership or power, but because of what they believe in and the charisma that they carry, you follow them and you're committed to it because of that. So those are the 3 different responses to the use of power. Okay, let me see what else. Okay, we're going to skip ahead to page 26 of the PowerPoint and go over some of these. We'll finish up with this page right here. So these are 6 principles for asserting leader influence upon others. Now looking at these, the 6 that they talk about here: appeal to a vision or higher purpose, use rational persuasion, help people to like you, rely on the rule of reciprocity, develop allies, and ask for what you want. Have any of you, as we finish up here, used any of these strategies to influence others that you can think of? I would say one of the ones that I use a lot is the idea of help people to like you. I like to be, not necessarily crack jokes, but be very either optimistic or come off as an easygoing guy who will listen to you and have a good time with you. And so that's one kind of strategy or principle that I use a lot of the time to have some sort of assert my influence over others in that way. Do any of you feel like you use any of these as well? I think another one that I try to do is to develop allies as well. People that either agree with me or I agree with them, or we're both going for the same goals or outcomes, and we feel connected in that way. So I would say that that's something else that I do.
Relying on the rule of reciprocity.
Mm-hmm.
So like you try to help others out whenever you do.
Yeah, yeah. I like the idea of reciprocity. The whole idea of, you know, one day you might need help and the next day they need help, and knowing that you can go to another person and that they can come to you is a highly valuable aspect of influencing others. Any of these other 6 that you feel like you've used before, you can identify others that have used these strategies or principles before? Okay, we will finish there. I don't want to keep you guys all night. So as we look at chapter 12 for the assignments, if you want to turn to the end of the chapter, the discussion board for this chapter is actually discussion question number 1, which is on page 385. So it is for chapter 12, yeah. Discussion question number 1 on page 385. And then the case study for this chapter is on pages 378, or excuse me, 387 and 388. It's called the Suarez effect. And there are 3 questions that go along with that case study. Okay, so just a reminder, this is the last week of discussion boards and case studies. Next week, the 2 assignments are the paper and the exam, the written exam. And again, just as a reminder, the last week ends on Friday, so you have 12 days left in this class. And if you need any help with that leadership paper, please let me know as soon as possible. If you want to turn in a rough draft or have me take a look at your ideas, please try to do that this week so I have time to do that. Are there any other questions? All right, you all have a good week. I'll see you for our last class next Monday. And if I hear from any of you, I'll try to get back as quickly as possible. All right, thank you.